Montana Territory. Autumn of 1879, the wind came hard off the Bitterroots that morning, carrying the bite of snow and the scent of wet pine as Josetta Zeller stepped down from the stagecoach onto the muddy street of Clearwater Junction. She kept her shawl tight around her shoulders, the dark blue fabric soaked through at the edges from the long ride. Her boots sank slightly into the slush. She didn't look up, not yet. Not until she heard the driver toss down her single trunk with a thud and the whip crack of the horses moving on. She was alone now, not for the first time. A man stepped out from the livery across the street, tall and straight-backed with a rifle resting across one palm. His coat was worn but clean, hat pulled low over sun-dark hair. He watched her, quiet and still, like a man used to waiting. Josetta squared her shoulders, adjusted the grip on her bag, and walked straight past him toward the general store. Inside, the warmth hit her first, then the smell of coffee. She dropped her bag by the door and went straight to the counter. The shopkeeper, a woman past 50 with thick graying braids, looked up from her ledger. "I need to send a telegram," Josetta said. Her voice was steady. "To Sheriff Langston in Helena, I need him to know I've arrived." The woman gave her a long look. "You're the one they wrote about then." "The Zeller girl." Josetta nodded once. The shopkeeper only nodded back and pointed toward the back room. Josetta wrote out the message carefully. "Tell him I'm safe for now. He'll come for me." When she stepped back into the store, the cowboy was still there, closer now, watching. She didn't speak to him. Not yet. Instead, she carried her bag outside again, turned left toward the boarding house, and tried not to stumble over the rising fear in her throat. By sunset, word had already spread. She was the one from Helena. The one who ran. The one whose husband had broken a deputy's jaw in cold rage and gone into hiding after she disappeared with her 2 children. Josetta lit the lamp in the small upstairs room and opened the window for air. Downstairs, she could hear the other boarders talking over supper. She wondered if her son and daughter were sleeping yet. Dara was 5. Daniel just turned 3. She had left them with her cousin in Missoula under a false name. She had kissed their cheeks and promised she would come back for them as soon as it was safe. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass. He would come. Robert, her husband, he had always said she was his, that no law or man could take her away. She had seen what he did to the last man who tried. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it slowly. It was the cowboy. He removed his hat. "Name's Orin Nash," he said. "You looked like you needed someone to stand close." She stared at him. "I am not looking for company," she said. "I am not offering it," he replied. "But you said he'd come. I figured someone should be here when he does." She blinked. "You heard that?" Orin nodded once. "This town's small. Words travel fast." She studied him long enough to see that he meant what he said. There was no slyness in his face, no angle, just quiet steel. "You do not even know me," she said. "I do not have to," he said simply. "I know the kind of man who makes a woman run with 2 children and no money." Her chest tightened. "I left them in Missoula," she said quietly, "with my cousin. If I die, I want someone to know they are there." "You are not going to die," he said. "You do not know that. I know I will be here when he comes, and I will not let him hurt you." She looked at him for a long time. "Why?" she asked. Orin looked down at his hat, rubbed the brim between his fingers. "I lost someone once. A woman. She was trying to leave a man like that. She asked me to help her. I waited too long." Josetta felt her throat close up. He looked back at her. "I do not intend to wait again." She stepped back from the door. "You can come in, just for a moment." He did not move. "I will stay out here," he said. "You rest." "I will be close." She nodded and closed the door, heart pounding. That night she did not sleep much, but she did not feel alone. Over the next few days, Orin kept close. He did not crowd her. He did not ask questions. He stayed nearby, sometimes sitting on the porch of the boarding house, sometimes working with the blacksmith or helping load freight at the station. She watched him from the window. He was good with his hands, quiet with animals, polite with the women who passed. But he saved his real attention for her, always watching the street, always aware. On the 4th day she brought him coffee. You do not have to do this, she said. He took the mug and gave a small nod. I know. She sat beside him. They did not speak for a while. Then she said, when I was 17, I thought Robert was the only man who would ever look at me. Orin looked at her but did not interrupt. He was older, confident. My father ran the dry goods shop. Robert had money. He said he would take care of me. That I would never have to work again. Orin let her speak. After the wedding, he started to change, little things, controlling what I wore, who I saw. By the time Dara was born, I was not allowed to leave the house without him. She glanced at him. You do not have to hear this. I think I do, he said. She looked away again. He never hit me in front of the children, but he would wait until they were asleep, and he would say it was my fault that I made him do it. Orin's hands tightened around the mug. I hid money for years, she said. Enough for 2 train tickets. When he killed that deputy, I knew it was now or never. Her voice cracked. I did not want to leave them, she whispered. But I had to draw him away. If he finds them, Orin put the mug down. He will not, he said. She turned to him. He looked her straight in the eye. He will come for you, Orin said, and I will be here when he does. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back. You are not afraid? I am, he said quietly, but I will not let that stop me. She reached for his hand. He let her take it. Something passed between them then. Not a promise, not yet, but something solid, something real. The next morning, a telegram arrived. Robert Zeller was seen in Butte asking questions. Headed north. Josetta folded the paper with shaking hands. Orin stood beside her. They both knew the time was coming. But Josetta's hands did not shake as much when she reached for Orin's arm, and he did not let go. The sun rose behind a low veil of cloud, casting a dull gold over the frost-laced fields beyond Clearwater Junction. Josetta stood at the back of the boarding house, her hands wrapped in a woolen cloth as she worked a knife through the thick skin of a squash. The boarding mistress had let her help in exchange for meals and quiet. Josetta preferred it to sitting idle. Movement kept the fear from settling too deep. Orin came around the corner just as she wiped her hands. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her, then at the ground, then back again. I fixed the latch on the shed, he said, was catching wrong in the cold. She brushed a strand of hair from her face with her wrist. I didn't ask you to do that. You didn't have to. She studied him a moment. You always work with your hands, he gave a short nod. Always figured if something broke, it ought to be fixed proper. That's not how most men think. I'm not most men. She set the cloth down and faced him fully. What did you do before this? He glanced toward the hills. Ran cattle near Fort Benton, drove for a rancher who died without heirs. Left the land to the bank. I drifted after that. Didn't feel right staying where history's already written. She tucked her hands into her apron. You've seen a lot of places then. Enough to know I'd rather be where I'm needed than where I'm known. She didn't speak for a while. Then, I used to imagine running a bakery, just bread and pies, simple things. He raised an eyebrow. What stopped you? Marrying the wrong man, he shifted, the toe of his boot dragging a line in the dirt. You still could. There's a woman in town who sells preserves out of her kitchen. I heard her say she can't keep up with orders. Josetta looked at him sharply, something between a challenge and a question in her eyes. You think I've still got years ahead of me? I think you've got more than that, he said. You've got choices. She looked at her hands. I don't remember the last time someone said that to me. He stepped closer. Not touching, just close enough she could feel the warmth of him. You don't owe me anything, he said, but I'll stand between you and what's coming as long as you let me. She blinked once slowly. And if I ask you to stay longer, I will. A gust of wind stirred dried leaves at their feet. The silence held, not empty but full. Later that day, she found him behind the livery, sanding a warped plank. She leaned against the post near him, arms folded. I wrote my children a letter, she said, in case something happens to me. He didn't stop working. Where'd you leave it? In the drawer beside my bed, sealed with wax. He nodded once. She hesitated. I don't want them to grow up afraid of men. They won't, he said. Not if the first one they remember leaving them behind was doing it to keep them safe. She swallowed hard. You believe that? I do. She stepped closer. What do you believe in, Orin? He looked up at her, eyes steady. Second chances. And people doing better when they know better, she exhaled. I want that. You've already started. The next day, the sheriff from Helena arrived with a deputy and a worn notebook. Josetta met them in the back parlor of the boarding house. Orin stood just outside the door. The sheriff's eyes were sharper than she remembered, his voice lower. We tracked him to a freight yard south of Anaconda, he said. He's moving on foot now, keeps off main roads. You think he'd come here first? If he knows me at all, she said. He will. Then we'll stay close by, the sheriff said. But we can't guard you forever, she nodded. He won't wait long. After they left, Orin found her by the riverbank. She was kneeling, washing linens in the cold water, her sleeves rolled past her elbows. He crouched beside her. You could have asked them to take you back with them, I know. But you didn't. She wrung out the cloth. I'm tired of running. He dipped his hand into the water, let it swirl past his fingers. Then we hold the line here. She watched the current. I used to think I was weak. You aren't, she looked at him. You say that like you know, I do. Because I've seen weak, and it doesn't look like someone's still standing after what you've walked through. She didn't reply. But when he stood, she handed him the last linen to rinse. They walked back up the slope together, the day pale and still. The following morning, Orin found a scrap of paper tacked to the stable door. No name. Just a crude drawing of a woman and 2 children beneath a noose. He burned it in the stove before she could see. Then he sat with his rifle across his knees until sundown. That night, Josetta came to him with a blanket and a plate of stew. She didn't speak, just handed them over and sat on the step beside him. He said nothing either, but their shoulders leaned together beneath the stars, and neither moved away. The wind carried a different weight that morning, heavier, more certain. Josetta stood on the narrow porch of the boarding house, her shawl pulled tight as gray clouds pressed low against the hills. The road into Clearwater Junction lay quiet, but her eyes didn't leave it. Behind her, the door creaked open. You haven't eaten, Orin said. She didn't turn. I couldn't keep it down. He came to stand beside her, hat in hand. His presence was steady, not demanding, just there like a tree that had always been part of the landscape. I spent last night oiling the rifle, he said. Cleaned it down to the pins. She nodded once, her gaze locked on a distant bend in the trail. I used to bake when I was nervous. Now my hands just shake. You ever fire a shotgun? She glanced at him. Only once. My father's old single barrel. Nearly knocked me off the porch. He allowed the corner of his mouth to lift just slightly. We'll keep that one for warning shots then. I won't run again, she said. No matter what he brings, I know. They stood in silence a while longer. Then she asked, why'd you never marry? I did, he said. Young, she died with the baby. Fever took 'em both before they saw spring. Josetta's throat tightened. I'm sorry, he shrugged softly. I stopped talking to God after that. Took me a long time to come back around. Her voice was hushed. You believe again? I don't kneel much, but I speak quiet into the night sometimes. Figure someone's listening. She looked at him then, really looked. His face held lines the sun hadn't carved. Grief had done that. I never had anyone stay, she said. Not once. You do now. That afternoon, the sheriff and his deputy took up posts near the edge of town. They didn't wear badges in sight. Josetta watched them from the parlor window, her fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve. I dreamed of him last night, she said to Orin as he came in from the yard. He was sitting in the kitchen like nothing had ever happened, asking where the children were. Orin set his coat on the hook. Mud clung to the hem. What did you say? I told him I buried them in the woods. He paused, then stepped closer. Did he believe you? No, he smiled. That was worse than shouting. He looked at her hands. You still shaking? Not as much now. He hesitated, then reached for her wrist. His thumb pressed gently over the pulse there. They both felt it fast, but steady. You're stronger than you think, he said. I don't feel strong, still doesn't make it untrue. She didn't pull away. Later, after supper, they sat in the barn, oil lantern between them. The horses shifted occasionally, the sound of hooves soft against packed earth. "I thought I'd be alone the rest of my life," she said. He didn't look at her right away. "And now?" "I don't know," she said, "but I don't feel invisible anymore." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You're not." She looked down at her hands. "If I make it through this, I think I'd like to build something, not just survive." He met her eyes. "I'd help you." "You know what that means, don't you?" "I do." She didn't answer, but she didn't have to. Near midnight, the sheriff knocked once on her door. "He's here," he said. "Just walked into the saloon, calm as you please, asked for whiskey." Josetta's blood went cold. Orin was already at her side. The sheriff continued, "We can hold him." "You don't have to see him." "Yes," she said, steady now. "I do." They walked through the streets together, Orin and the sheriff. The deputy waited just outside the saloon. Inside, Robert Zeller leaned against the bar, boots dusty, coat damp from travel. His hair was longer than before, beard thicker, but his eyes hadn't changed. He turned. "Well," he said, voice smooth, "there you are." Orin stepped forward. Robert barely glanced at him. "And who's this?" "Another fool who thinks you're worth bleeding for." Josetta looked him straight in the eye. "He doesn't have to think it. He knows." Robert's expression shifted, a flicker of disbelief, then something harder. "You think this place will keep you? That this town cares?" "She doesn't need the town," Orin said, voice even. "She's got me." Robert laughed. "You planning to shoot me in front of witnesses?" The sheriff stepped into the light. "You should be more worried about the gallows back in Helena." "I'll see her again," Robert said. "One way or another." Josetta stepped closer. "No, you won't." From her pocket, she pulled the folded letter she'd written for the children. She held it up, then tore it in two. Orin watched her, still as stone. "You don't own me anymore," she said. "You never did." Robert lunged, quick and cruel, but the deputy had already moved. The weight of the law came down hard, and this time there were too many hands to fight. He was in irons before he hit the ground. Josetta didn't flinch. She and Orin walked back in silence. At her door, she turned to him. "You didn't have to come with me," she said. "I know. But you did." "I always will." She reached for his hand, fingers lacing through his. "Where do we go from here?" He looked toward the dark horizon. "Wherever you want. I've got nothing behind me." She stepped into him, slow and sure, her head resting just beneath his collarbone. "You do now," she said, and he stayed right where he was, arms strong around her, holding steady through the night. 2 weeks passed beneath a thinning sky. The leaves curled brown and brittle in the wind, and Josetta began to breathe easier in the mornings. There were no more telegrams, no more drawings left on doors, no more sudden knocks after dark. The law had taken Robert south under heavy guard. The sheriff said the trial wouldn't be quick, but it would be thorough. Josetta began kneading dough again. She stood in the back kitchen of Mrs. Karsten's house, the woman who bottled preserves in her cellar, and handed out tough advice like it was penny candy, and worked the flour through her fingers until the ache in her arms was steady and clean. "Your shoulders are too stiff," Orin said one afternoon, stepping into the kitchen with wood dust clinging to his sleeves. "You lean too much to the right when you need." She looked up, flour on her cheekbone. "And you know better. Watched my sister bake when I was young." She said it was like leaning into the earth, even weight. Josetta rolled her wrists again, slower this time. "You don't talk much about your family." "Not much to tell. My sister's buried outside Dodge City. My father drank himself out of a name. I left before I was old enough to be anything but a shadow." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Then maybe it's time to plant something new." He leaned against the frame. "You still thinking about that bakery?" "Every morning," she said. "I see it clearer now. A place with white curtains and a stove that doesn't smoke. Somewhere folks can sit and eat something warm without hurrying." "You'll need a strong roof," he said, "and beams that don't sag in the thaw." She tilted her head. "You offering to build it, if you'll bake the bread?" She smiled, not the careful kind from before, but the sort that reached her eyes. "We'd need a place to live, too." He folded his arms. "I saw a parcel west of town, empty land, good sun. The widow who held it passed last spring. Her nephew's looking to sell." She set down the dough. You already asked, didn't sign anything, he said, but I told him someone might be interested, someone with plans. Josetta stepped around the table. It's not just me anymore, is it? No, he said. It hasn't been for a while. She reached up and touched his collar. You think we're ready? He didn't look away. I think we're done surviving. It's time to build. Later that evening, they walked the edge of the land he'd mentioned. The grass was short and dry, the slope gentle. A strand of creek ran along the back edge, too thin for fishing but enough for washing or watering a small garden. Josetta picked up a stone and turned it in her hand. It's quiet here. Orin knelt beside an old fence post. That's the kind of quiet you can grow into. She looked at him. You think we could bring the children here, raise them where they don't have to unlearn fear? I do. She crouched beside him. I'd have to ride to Missoula. It's 3 days each way. I'll go with you, he said. Or stay behind and start the work. She studied the way his hands moved over the old post. You'd stay while I went, if you asked me to. She stood. Then I'd rather you ride with me. They left 3 mornings later, bundled against the early chill. The road west was rough, but the air sharpened her thoughts. They stopped at night in way stations, where Orin kept watch and Josetta pressed her face against the pillow and imagined the small arms of her children curled against her side. Near Missoula, the trees turned taller and the land opened like a held breath. Her cousin greeted them with caution, then relief. Dara and Daniel ran to her, their hair longer, their faces older than she remembered, but they still fit beneath her arms. Still called her mama with the same small urgency. Orin stood back, touching the brim of his hat only once. He didn't speak until night fell and the children were asleep. She was afraid you'd bring trouble, he said softly, sitting beside Josetta on the porch. She had every right to be. He looked toward the stars. They're good kids, you did right by them. I left them, she whispered. You walked into danger to keep them hidden. That's not the same as leaving. She leaned into his side. They'll need time to know you. I've got time. She turned her face toward his shoulder. And if they never do, I'll love you just the same, he said. She stayed pressed against him, listening to the wind stir through the pine. They rode back in late October, the wagon heavier with blankets and small boots and 2 sleepy children who leaned against one another under quilts. Orin drove steady, one hand on the reins, the other shielding the sun from his eyes. By the time they reached Clearwater Junction again, the land they'd walked was theirs. Josetta stepped down first, her skirt dusty hair tied back in a simple braid. She reached for Dara's hand, then Daniel's. Orin lifted them both down, one after the other, gentle and sure. Where's the bakery? Daniel asked, rubbing his eyes. Josetta looked at the open field. We'll build it, Orin nodded. Together. They walked the land again, this time as a whole, and for the first time in a long while there was nothing behind them that they needed to run from. Only earth beneath their feet, and sky above wide enough for anything they dared to dream. By early December, the roof beams were raised. Orin worked alongside 2 men from town and a boy eager to earn coin, measuring each cut with care, speaking little. Josetta kept the children close, their boots crunching over frozen soil as she guided them around the frame of what would soon be their home. They lived in 2 borrowed rooms behind the old feed store, warm enough if you set the stove to burn through the night. Dara kept her doll wrapped in a spare apron. Daniel lined up stones along the windowsill, naming each one like they were horses. Josetta taught them how to mix lye soap and patch worn socks. She told herself each day was temporary, that the settling would come. One morning she found Orin alone in the half-built kitchen, standing in the doorway without his coat. Frost clung to the floorboards. You'll catch cold, she said, stepping in behind him. He turned, slow. Stove's in. Thought I would see how the morning light hits. She came to stand beside him. Pale gold slid across the floor, catching on the curled shavings of wood. You think it'll be enough? She asked. He nodded. Come spring, it'll warm the whole place by breakfast. She watched his face, the way his eyes tracked the light like it meant something more than sun. I keep waiting to feel like I belong here, she said. You do? I want to believe that. He turned to her. What's keeping you from it? Maybe I still don't know how to be safe, she said. Not really. I've been looking over my shoulder too long. He studied her a moment. Then I'll keep watch until you don't need to. She reached for his hand, fitting her fingers between his. You already have. That night, Dara asked if they would stay in Clearwater forever. Josetta tucked the quilt around her shoulders. Do you want to? It smells like bread here, Dara said. Even when you're not baking, Josetta smiled. That's enough of a reason for me. The next morning, she walked to the far edge of the land and turned slowly in a circle, boots planted in a patch of thawing earth. She pictured the bakery porch, the bell above the door, the long counter lined with jars. Behind her, Orin approached with a rolled chart. I marked the creek path, he said. It might be enough for a mill wheel if we want one. He looked up. You still want to call it Josetta's? She shook her head. I want it to be ours. He unrolled the paper and knelt to weigh it down with a stone. She crouched beside him. There's room for a coop, he said, pointing. And the woman downriver's selling off her hens come spring. I could teach Dara to gather eggs. And Daniel's already trying to hammer everything he sees. She laughed softly. He's going to copy you. Orin looked at her then, quiet and full. I don't want to live anywhere else, he said. Not without you. You never ask me, she said. I didn't want to press. She reached for his hand. Ask me now. He set the paper aside. Josetta, he said, steady and sure, will you marry me? Not for safety, not for shelter, but for every morning after. She didn't hesitate. Yes. They married inside the unfinished house, beneath roof beams strung with pine and ribbon. Mrs. Karsten brought honey cakes. The boy who'd helped with the walls held Daniel on his hip and cried when Josetta kissed her groom. No preacher, just the town clerk and hands joined over a family Bible. Later, Orin carried her over the threshold, though the floor still creaked and the wind came through the seams. They laid a quilt down near the stove, and she folded into his arms with the ease of someone who had waited a long time to rest. I was never meant to be alone, she whispered. You never will be again. By spring, the bakery opened with 3 loaves in the window and a hand-painted sign that read Nash and Zeller. Not many knew who did the baking and who built the shelves, but everyone knew the pies sold out by noon. Dara fed the hens before school. Daniel carried firewood in short stacks, proud and solemn. Folks asked if they were kin. Josetta always said yes. On warm afternoons, she and Orin sat on the porch, knees touching, hands often entwined. He read aloud from the paper, and she told him what she'd add to the next batch of jam. Their words were fewer now, but fuller. Nothing needed proving. One evening she watched him mend the hinge on the gate while the children played in the grass. You still talk to the stars? She asked. He looked up at the sky, pale with dusk. Now and then. What do you say? He crossed the yard and kissed her temple. Thank you. She leaned into him, heart full, and when darkness fell, the house stayed lit with lamplight and laughter. They had come through the long night, and they had built morning with their own hands.